6.5 hours later.
Fuck, dude, this is still going! It's Christmas!
It's that time of year again where everyone sits down, relaxed, and stays with their loved ones.
Unlike me. But with the holiday season, a tradition comes, and with YouTube, there's always one video I always like to watch during the holidays. That being... So since I kind of look at video games, I figured it'd be only appropriate for me to look at some N64 games, but what's the N64 most known for?
Well, for the most part, the N64 is known for platformers, racing games, party games, and first-person shooters. It's not known for RPGs, but there's always this one game I've heard about that's an RPG for the N64.
That being Quest 64. Now, I've heard nothing but hate for this game, but why? Why is this game remembered but for all the wrong reasons? Well, the only thing I can do is play it, so let's begin.
First and foremost, who developed this game? Well, Quest 64 was developed by Imagineer, not a Disney Imagineer, but the company is named that way. This company was the first to publish the original SimCity to a whole bunch of Japanese computers when it first came out, but then they made their own console games and ported games to consoles at the time. They're still around to this day, making fitness boxing for the Switch. Has anyone ever played that before? Okay, so why did they make an RPG for the N64 out of all things? Mainly it was an undersaturated market in gaming, considering that the PlayStation 1 had a whole bunch of RPGs to begin with thanks to the release of Final Fantasy VII, so yeah, Imagineer had the right idea to make an RPG for the system. The game first came out in the US, which is weird for a Japanese-made RPG, but okay. And it was met with middling reviews at the time, but nowadays people call this game bad, but why so? Well, with every RPG I've played, the story is the glue that pretty much holds everything together. Whether it be a turn-based RPG, an action RPG, a Souls-type RPG, where, to be honest, I'm not really into the story, but I still fucking love Bloodborne. So that being said, Quest 64 has a very shallow story. Like, I'm gonna cut straight to the point here. Quest 64 has the most basic of a story I've ever seen in an RPG, but I'll explain why that is. You play as Brian, an apprentice magician in the land of Celtland, which is supposedly inspired by Ireland. You know, because Ireland has a bunch of deserts and stuff like that. Brian's dad was stopping this thief who stole this Elatel book, which supposedly controls the world! Weird. So Brian sets off to save the world by getting this book and the 4 stones that represent the elements. How original. And of course, save his dad. That's it. There are no other side quests in the game, and no other side characters to really interact with. Well, except for this one person we see throughout the entire game. That's an adventurer, but we later learn that they're a puppet made from the final boss or some shit at the tail end of the game. Now they're questioning their humanity and shit like that. Like, dude, this seems really thrown at the last minute to give the game a little bit of substance, but it's too little too late. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of NPCs in the game that gives a little bit of flavor text, but at the same time, it doesn't really make a difference in the game at all. Overall, the story seems bare bones at best.
And I know I'm bitching about something that's very trivial here, but when I'm playing this game, I don't care about the story or any of the characters. There's nothing for me to gravitate to. So I just don't care about who wins, loses, and whatever the hell else goes on in this game. In this game's case, we only have the gameplay to go on.
Which of course we're about to tackle. So Brian walks around an overworld, a very open and spacious overworld where we have battles in. Now the cool thing about this is that you don't have a separate load screen where you go into battle, it just automatically goes into battle. The bad thing is that the camera clips in terrain every once in a while, but I later learned if you hold the B button, it recenters the camera right behind you, so that's nice. What sucks about the camera is that when you're in a town or in a very cramped space like a cave or something, the camera likes to seem to either bounce around or clip through something. It just doesn't like to stay behind Brian. The really bad thing is that the overworld is too big for its own good. and Brian moves so slowly that getting from place to place just feels boring. The game is pretty linear when it comes to progression from going place to place. You move from town to town and getting all their elemental gems or some shit like that. I'll be honest with you though, even though the game is linear, there's no real sense of direction, if that makes any sense. Like, sure, you give someone to tell you what you're going to do at the very beginning of the game, but then you have little context on where to go and what to do. But you eventually figure out that in almost every town you go into, you need to beat some bad guy up, get their gem, and that's it. You also have very little side areas, but these places are just mainly here to gain some XP. I should mention how you level up in this game, which is not just one typical experience bar, like a lot of other turn-based RPGs. In this game you have 4 different bars, and the more you do something, the more experience you get from that. That makes sense, but to be honest, I didn't really notice much change outside of my health and magic bars going up. The only way to really increase your defense is letting enemies hit you with whatever. That's kinda dumb.
It's like someone getting hit with a semi-truck and then suddenly getting back up, or a wrestler no-selling a move. It's pretty dumb.
You do gain levels, but only in your magic. You have an experience bar, which helps, but you also have these spirit whiffs in an area, or some shit like that. It automatically increases a magic level, up by 1. I would say battling is useless, but to be honest, these spirit whiffs are not as common as I would like them to be, so you have to battle to level up. But when you do level up, there are 4 different options on what kind of magic you want to upgrade. Earth, Fire, Water, and Wind, which is marked down the 4 face buttons on the N64 controller, which is a cool idea, just to be honest, it kind of felt a little cumbersome to find the right magic spell I wanted. What's wrong with having a little list instead? And as for the magic itself, well...
Feel the power of my magic!
If you thought that was bad, well, it's not getting any better in this game. You can't max out all your magic in the game. I mean, if you really go out of your way, I think you can max out 3 out of the 4 elements. But the magic isn't that impressive. The spells are either rocks, bigger rocks, moving rocks, and then an avalanche. And then you have different sized water pillars that do almost the exact same amount of damage.
Now that's a lot of damage!
But you need to level up to get some of the more important spells, since they're gated off by a certain level threshold. You're going to need to level up the water spell because it has the only health spell in the game, unless you use items. Alright, so every item is given to you. You can't buy items because there's no money in the game, so NPCs just give you the items instead.
It doesn't really feel like I've worked for any of these items since they were given to me. I'm basically just freeloading off these people.
And when you eventually run out of items, then you have to constantly use the health spell to heal, and it doesn't do much. It takes me like 5 or 6 times to fully heal. And when you're in battle, that could be a huge problem when you're constantly getting hit. Eventually you'll die and go back to one of the hotels in the game, which is also the only place where you can save, which is convenient.
Okay, so I've been saying little details about the gameplay with, the experience system, health, magic, and all that wonderful crap, but what makes this game awful is how obnoxiously slow it is.
Like over here. Each battle takes a long time, and not only to reach a certain enemy, but you also have to make sure that you're in range for your magic. Or at the beginning of the game's case, you have to whack your enemies with your staff. At the beginning of the game, this is way more useful than some of the early spells. You just trade blows until you finally win. After a while of grinding, because you can't beat the first boss, this becomes boring. And one of the worst things a game can do for me is bore me. After a while, you unlock some spells, which I mentioned don't really do much or break the game, with one spell in particular, that spell being Magic Shield. For 3 moves, this spell will block out any damage from any magic spell, and since almost every enemy in the game attacks you with magic, this breaks the game. So after a while, you kind of go into a cycle where you're using Magic Shield at the very beginning and use the avalanche attack, which is kind of a crapshoot to use given that it only hits enemies when it feels like it, but it takes off a lot of damage when it works, and then occasionally healing, and that's about it.
But the one thing that gets extremely annoying when it comes to the battles is the amount of random encounters that happen.
Like, look here. I barely walk forward and I go into another battle. This sucks! And since battles take forever, and I have to walk close to enemies just to make sure I'm going to hit them, I just run instead. It's much faster than dealing with them. And I know, I'm basically setting myself up for failure if I don't grind, but at the same time, using the magic spiel takes away any challenge from playing this game. I mean, sometimes it misses, and you'll eventually die, on the rare occasion. Eventually, you just fall into the cycle that I mentioned beforehand, and it goes all the way to the end of the game. Do that for about 6 hours, and there's the game. Going on to the graphics, and, well, I guess they look okay for the system, but either everything looks oversaturated with very bright colors, or it's very dark. I had to mess with my capture card settings to properly see some things. And the music is not good, to be honest with you. Some of the tracks sound like they're being played off of an old Casio, with very little composition on the tracks.
Overall, this game could have been much better if they knew how RPGs works, like have a better story or make the battle system a little less samey.
The overabundance of random encounters and the lack of direction when it comes to this game doesn't help, so I would not recommend playing this game in the slightest. I got bored with this game, so much so that I had a podcast going on in the background while playing it, which isn't exactly the best way of keeping my attention for a game.
Well, that wasn't exactly the best way to spend a holiday, but you know what? Come back next time, I'll have something a little bit more special when it comes to Christmas, so stay tuned for that. And thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have an awesome holiday, wherever you're celebrating. Please like this video and comment on whatever games you want me to review next time, and maybe I'll consider it in the future, you never know. Thank you guys for watching. Stay safe. Have a happy holiday.